Street foot.
Hello? What's up?
Not much. How about
Oh,
you?
yeah. I'm pretty good. Glad to be calling in.
Yeah, I love it. I love the community interaction. All right, hit me up. What's the contention?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I'm not like transphobic. I'm very, trans rights, everything, just because I think your chat kind of tends to assume whoever you're debating with is conservative. I think we share similar political views.
Have I talked to you
Um,
before?
Yeah, we did talk before.
When did we talk before?
We talked before a long time ago about utilitarianism, and
Okay.
it didn't.
All
Is
right.
that all right?
No, I just recognized your voice. I was just double checking. All right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assumed I was like a religious conservative. I'm not a conservative, but that's irrelevant. But yeah, I mean this puberty blockers thing, like I can see where you're coming from, but I mean, how could someone know that they would feel dysphoric about puberty before puberty happens, is what I'm wondering.
Because they don't feel dysphoric about puberty, they feel dysphoric about their sexual attributes, some of which are present before puberty. I mean, it's not like we grow penises and vaginas during puberty. We kind of got those already. There have been many reported instances of transgender people feeling dysphoria as early as like 4 or 5 years old, like strong, medically verifiable feelings of dysphoria.
Oh, okay. So when you say you want to use puberty blockers for dysphoria, you mean like sexual dysphoria, not gender dysphoria? Yeah.
Well, gender dysphoria usually means sexual dysphoria. I use the term sexual dysphoria to clarify because I have to actually debate these positions. But like nobody is like giving kids hormone, like nobody right now everything that's happening to like trans children seems to be pretty medically verified. Is there something in particular you have like an issue with?
Well, yeah, I thought you were saying that gender is basically someone starts to feel dysphoric about like their social role and their gender identity, and then the idea is that going through puberty for their sex is going to make them feel uncomfortable. Well, yeah, in terms of their personal because that wouldn't make any sense if that was your idea. Like if they were uncomfortable about having a penis, then obviously it goes to show that if they start growing a bunch of body hair and stuff, I think it's a safe bet that they're gonna not like that. But if it's just like I want to wear dresses or stuff that's considered quote unquote feminine, even though I don't like. Uh-huh. Right.
Apparently I'm muted? Wait, am I still muted? Hello? Okay, I don't know how I hit a mute button. Okay, so what if you have like a psychiatric or a medical professional who assesses the mental state of a kid and determines like even if they don't feel a great degree of sort of physical discomfort with their body, there's probably a decent likelihood of them being trans, and just to be sure, they put them on hormone blockers.
I mean, yeah, I trust doctors, but I don't consider, and especially with a field as new as this, I don't consider what is the current medical consensus to be like the end-all be-all of, like that sounds like an utter self-fulfilling prophecy. So I like
what
the
else
trans
would we defer to?
I'll tell you. Well, I mean, I don't know right now, but I'm not a fan of gender roles, right? I'm a gender abolitionist like you, and I'm a fan of the trans movement. But I do think the trans movement goes in some directions where they're further validating the system of gender that we operate under right now. So when you do that, you're kind of inadvertently validating the idea that to this kid that their physical features and their puberty is somehow related to their identity. Like,
well, I mean, very few people are gender abolitionists. If we're talking about like the perspective of a gender abolitionist, then maybe you could make that argument. But doctors aren't concerned with furthering our ideological goals. They're concerned with the mental well-being of the person who they're treating. So I don't think our political ascription should be.
Well, that's a pretty bad thing in that case, right? Like, gender abolition is the ultimate goal. Like to me, like trans rights, well, obviously rights, but like trans ideology without gender abolitionism in the current day America is not at that much of a benefit. I see.
Wait, no, wait. Yeah, it absolutely is. Trans ideology, like gender, like gender constructionist theory, is incredibly helpful to people. It helps us understand that the social roles that are placed in us are just those social roles. B, it gives like like life purpose and like a chance of like well-being towards transgender people. Like it's not like an all or nothing thing.
I believe in well-being towards trans. Well, can we agree that no one would want to be in an ideal world? No one would want to be transgender because either the characteristics applied to each gender would be so irrelevant that there would be no emotional well-being to be gained by switching categories, or there wouldn't even be genders, right? Like that would be like when you say so. Without gender abolitionism, transgender ideology does not promote the idea that there's not characteristics applied to gender without gender abolitionism, right?
Well, no, gender abolitionism is prescriptive. Gender abolitionism makes the argument that the world would be a better place if there were no gender roles, like, period. But
Right.
the gender constructionist theory, which is what generally leads to us understanding transgender people as they exist today, is more descriptive. It's the idea that gender and like the roles that were assigned are a product of social conditions, and that for that reason there's a high degree of arbitrarity there. But I think that you can get a lot of utility just out of the descriptive element there without using any kind of prescriptive assessment that we need to eliminate gender altogether. And I do believe that even in a gender abolitionist society, there would still be people who experience sexual dysphoria.
Yeah, well, sexual dysphoria in my mind is completely different from gender dysphoria just because of the amount of trans people who it's completely about identity for, I think.
Well,
I mean,
sure. Well, in that case, like we could just like, if we're using the term sexual dysphoria, then there wouldn't really be any gender dysphoria. Like you wouldn't. Dysphoria like refers pretty specifically
Well,
to a
it's
certain
very
type
important
of.
to separate them, right? Because we want, as a society right now, as we're having this discussion, we want to make it clear to kids that you can have any kind of personality traits that you want, and they're unconnected to your like physicality, right? That's the message that we ultimately want to send.
Yeah, but what does this have to do with the issue with like giving kids hormone
What it has to do with is, so when you say that like doctors aren't gender abolitionists, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm not just going to defer to what they say, because like I think what you're forgetting is we live in a country where like so many people believe in like biological determinism when it comes to gender. Like there's people who not only do they not give a shit about like gender theory, but they think like girls are like born with like a cooking and like wearing dresses like gene in their brain, basically.
Well, yeah.
So whenever a doctor, if a doctor's not a gender abolitionist and they tell a kid and they see a kid and they're like, oh, you like wearing dresses and or whatever, or you have this kind of personality, then obviously we need to make your physiology fit with that. Like, isn't that kind of like a net bad at that point?
We don't give hormone blockers to kids because they're like boys who like dresses or whatever. We usually give hormone blockers to kids if like medical professionals can suss out like underlying characteristics.
Well, yeah, that's why I said if it's about their sex, like if they're uncomfortable
but then the thing you take umbrage with doesn't happen then. I don't know of any doctors who are out there. Now there are some examples, like for example, I know in the United Kingdom's gender clinical therapy unit, there have been some instances of doctors being overeager to prescribe gender dysphoria, but I would consider this to be sort of like a byproduct of some of the kinks we're going to find in a new system of medical prescription, rather than like the general trend doctors are taking when it comes to trans kids, you know?
Right. So in your ideal world, then the focus would be that we would not be giving hormone blockers or puberty blockers to kids who are merely have gender dysphoria, not sexual dysphoria.
Well, I don't think there is a gender dysphoria. I think I use the term sexual dysphoria instead of gender dysphoria because I think it's more technically accurate. Because we say gender dysphoria, but what we're referring to is a deep discomfort with physiological attributes, which are a product of sex. So I prefer
That's what
using.
gender dysphoria is.
Well, that's yes, but I use the term sexual dysphoria because I feel like it clarifies some stuff that other people would otherwise like find confusing. Because I have to tailor my language to the interests of people who don't know much about trans people.
But I thought it's gender dysphoria if you have like a man, for example, and he says, I don't know if I'm using the pronouns in the way that I should for this, but
I'll parse it out. Don't worry.
okay. So you have like a man and he says, oh, well, I'm I don't want to like, you know, act. I have a blank personality trait, and I I want to. I mean, this is kind of a problem I have. Like, I believe trans people are completely valid, but I do feel like the trans movement sometimes falls back on gender roles too much.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah, there are always going to be like this is one of the problems of trying to like reify your identity in a society that questions it, you know? Like
mhm.
it's kind of like a weird like bizarre world version of toxic masculinity. If you tell like trans women like they're not authentically women until they meet a certain threshold of performative femininity, then they're going to like do those things. You're going to see trans women defaulting to like the frilliest, girliest shit, and you might end up getting like some prescriptive shit there too. Like, hey, you know, like you need to act like this, or you're not like really a woman. You're just like faking, you know. Now, I
Is that like
obviously
what a
don't
TERF would
support
be
that.
saying in this situation?
I'm sorry.
Is that like what a TERF would be saying? Uh,
Well, I think a
in,
TERF would just argue that they're, like trans people are just delusional, like people of their birth sex. I don't think TERFs recognize the validity of like any trans people.
I have very mixed feelings on this because I do have a lot of critiques about the kind of the way that gender identity and like a gender binary is furthered by the trans movement. But on the other end, I don't want to make any trans people, you know, feel invalid because I already know. Like, I think trans people are 100% valid, but I think like the rhetoric of the movement and stuff does kind of harm feminism a lot in some
Wait,
areas.
what elements of it do?
I I mean, so like I believe gender is a social construct. So obviously I believe, you know, there's a variety of ways someone who's quote unquote like biologically male can be uh, a woman if they fill that role. Uh, there's tons of ways that they can be a woman. So that's not my issue, but I take a little bit of issue. Like, so if there's someone who's like, I need to be called a woman or I'm gonna like die, like I need that, then not call them woman and you know, like they are a woman, right? Like there's no problem with that.
Yeah.
But I think there is some people where it's like I have blank personality traits, so I'm a woman, and that's it's not like it's not wrong because the definition can be whatever you, and that's how a lot of people define it these days. But it's also like if you don't really feel like you need to be called a woman, is that really something you want to ask for there?
I mean, does it hurt anyone?
Yeah, kind of. I mean,
Like
well,
I recognize as a gender abolitionist that I would prefer it if everyone would just like completely abandon all forms of gendered identification, because if we did so, it would make it easier for us to achieve that goal. But gender abolition is like a hundreds of years in the future, like super long standing.
oh, I don't believe that at all. I would have to completely disagree with that.
I
I
don't.
believe we could have gender abolitionism in like 50 years, probably. Gender
You
abolition.
think within my lifetime we would be able to eliminate like all forms of gendered society?
Relatively, I mean, we already. I think we're getting relatively close. Like, isn't there only like a few hurdles that really need to be crossed, and we're already like kind of in the
Our society
process.
is still hugely gendered. I mean, it's not as bad as it was in the 50s, admittedly, but I don't know. I think like we're still a really far way away from that particular goal.
I mean, are we talking about like abolishing like the word male and female? Or are we talking about removing removing the stereotypes associated with each gender to the point where the words are basically interchangeable and also it doesn't have any like emotional weight to whether someone calls you a man or a woman? Like I believe we could be in a society where like um someone would feel no difference between being called he and she because they're just used as like
But it's not,
almost like
well, yeah, for some people. Like, yeah, there are some, like, mega woke people today that might be on the cusp of that. But keep in mind, that's, like, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the population. And as long as a significant portion of the population believes in gender, we're all going to subscribe to those basic ideological tenets. We won't have any other choice. Most of the country is, like, in the exact same place gender-wise that we were back in the 1950s.
yeah, yeah. Maybe you've got a good point, just in terms of how far back some places in the United States are. But I mean, in terms of like getting rid of the stereotypes associated with gender, considering how much ground we've covered since the 50s, I think we could get to a point where people don't assume personality traits based on like what your gender is, which is I consider that to be the same thing as gender abolitionism.
Yeah, but we're nowhere near that. Even
Yeah.
relatively woke people still ascribe gendered characteristics like to people depending on their sex. Like the number of people in this country who are gender abolitionist, like this is like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of like the working public, you know? I think we're a far enough way away from being able to actually affect any kind of gender abolished world that the harm we get from telling like trans women that they shouldn't call themselves women because they don't have sexual dysphoria. All they're really doing is saying they're a woman because they like feminine things.
Well, no, I would never say that to a trans person, but I
Well,
said,
you
yeah, I
wouldn't
see.
say it to their face, but you just said it to me that you think
Well,
it's
no,
kind
I
of
wouldn't say it to their face if they told me like if you call me a man because of like the way I was raised and what I associate with the word man, like that makes me feel suicidal, then I wouldn't ask. I wouldn't even. I don't think that they should have to be called a man. I'm just saying, for some types of people, maybe it's not as necessary.
But what?
Maybe
Wait,
you know.
but that's kind of like a weasel word, right? Because you saying like that's not necessary, like that's basically the same language.
Well, I'm saying if I mean, yeah, I don't really know what to say in terms of that. Like, if there was a person who were to say that, you know, they more had the characteristics, and then the term woman was more something that was secondary to them, then obviously I'd say, well, if it's secondary to you and it's not really that important to you, then don't. Right? I mean, that's different from saying all trans people should not use the word woman because it's like furthers gender stereotypes.
Yeah, sure, but if a person wants to call themselves a woman and you're there to say like, "Hey, don't," because I'm a gender abolitionist and I don't like the fact that you're essentializing your socialized characteristics, you're still kind of doing the same thing, aren't you?
How so?
Because you're still like fundamentally like it's still important to them that they be referred to as a woman, and you're still kind of invalidating that by arguing that they're like harming the greater goal of delegitimizing gendered characteristics, you know?
Well, I don't quite understand the logic of at that point. So for this person, it's not like something that's so essential to their identity that their life hinges on it. So at that point, what?
But you can't
Why
really
are they?
tell that,
Why,
can you?
why are they a woman at that point? If
Well, why
I
why
believe
would they not be a woman if they don't care like either way, but they lean more
they would
towards?
not be a woman or be a woman, but then like why go with woman at that
Then
point for that
why
person,
not?
for this fictional person? Why not? But well,
Because
at that point,
they want to, right? I mean, that's why they would.
well, the reason why not would be because if someone tells me I'm a woman because like that is so core to my identity that I would die if I'm not seen as a woman, then I'm like, oh
I
man.
don't think you need to be on the brink of suicide for you to be like want to have your gender
Well, what
identity
is this?
respected.
So what is this very specific person? Which I'm sure there's people like this. What answer do you think they'd give me if I asked them why are you a woman? What would they say to me?
I think it depends on the person, right? I mean, that's a really personal question.
Well, it's gonna have to be. I want to be really careful here because I know this is a very touchy issue, and I really just want people to be doing well. But that's also why I'm talking about this.
Hmm.
I feel like their answer is going to be something sexist, no matter what, right?
What what do you identify as?
Male.
Why?
I identify as male because I don't. Because everyone identifies male because everyone who's ever met me has called me a male, and I don't care when they do that.
Wait, if you okay, so if you don't care, why not just go like as an NB? Like why are you reifying the social normalization of your identity as male just because it's the social default? Don't you think if you were to achieve your own goals, it would be best for you to bite the bullet and like
Well,
refer?
I think more the point is that I've never told anyone, and obviously coming from a cis guy, this is not a big accomplishment, but I've never told anyone what to call me, right?
How does that
That's
matter? I mean, you kind of just have. I just asked you what you
so.
identified as.
Well, yeah. If you, uh, I've never like been in an interaction with someone, and well, I don't really. Well, I mean, what I don't really see the comparison like between we're talking about someone who is going around and then maybe someone calls them a man because they confuse them for the gender they don't identify and they don't care, but then for their own for themselves they just say call me a woman. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, what's wrong with that though?
Well, what's wrong with that is if I ask them why, I feel like they're going to say like like I didn't say a personality trait when you asked me what my gender
Yeah,
is. I
but
didn't say I'm a man because I like to protect.
you did something kind of worse though. You
What did
said
I say?
you just said you just go by man because other people call you a man. I mean, in that
Right.
case, your identity is completely deferential to the bigoted social expectation that your genitalia makes you a man. So you've actually kind
My
of
identity. I don't associate my own identity with my gender at all.
yeah,
Like
but
if
you
I
just
want to,
explained to me why you like think of yourself as a man. Like
I really I don't think of myself when I think of myself, I don't think like, man first and foremost. I think of myself. Like, you can call me I don't, really use gender roles in that way. I
But yeah,
just
but I asked you like why you go as a man, and your answer was because other people say you do, basically, which is exactly the same type of like lazy deference to social expectations that you said you didn't like the idea of a trans woman doing. No.
um yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand what like kind of more what I'm saying is like taking the active role in it. Like when ContraPoints, I don't know if you remember when ContraPoints got kicked off of Twitter, she was like okay, so here's what I'm wondering. I know that the trans movement like couldn't have been this, but like because people have different needs. But like just fictionally, like in a fictionalized type of world, I wonder how people would have reacted to a movement of just men kind of defying gender expectations, if that makes any sense. Like,
Well, I mean, weren't they called like metrosexuals or like because that was the term originally, like metropolitan man. Like you made fun of them because they had like nice long hair, or they would have like ear piercings or something. Like that was kind of that, no?
yeah, I'm not really super familiar with the metrosexual thing. I mean, what would be my option? What would for you? What could I do to be more like I don't really understand. Like what am I doing that would be more legitimate to my beliefs about gender?
Well,
Like
if you, well, your argument, the problem I have is that your argument at its basic level, like if we strip it down from the sort of immaterial conditions, is you believe, you don't like the idea of people who don't have sexual dysphoria identifying as a gender other than that which they were assigned at birth, because to do so is to give credence to like the sort of social expectations concerning that gender. But then what you said to me is that you generally go by man because that's what other people like refer to you as, and it doesn't bother you, which is a deference
right,
to the exact same.
if I had any inclination to to feel like a feminine gender role and had an inclination to I think the difference is if I wanted to, I don't. This is also my problem. Like I don't know how these things exactly relate to gender. This I'm not trying to be like bad faith here, but like if I were to, I don't know, like if I started like painting my nails or something, or like wearing makeup, trying to think of like feminine things, like at that point, well, this is I don't know, maybe this isn't a great argument because I can't really imagine what it's like to have dysphoria. But if I wanted to do that, then I wouldn't I would let people call me whatever they wanted, just like the way they do now. That's what I'm kind of saying. I want to defer to. So I believe there's a difference between like action and language. I find weird about the trans movement is that it's the first one of these movements I've ever seen that's all about language. Like you go to the civil rights movement and it's like, please let us in restaurants, don't kick us out of restaurants.
Well,
And it's like,
wait,
no,
the trans
no,
movement isn't all about language. There is a lot of
it's not.
very
Yeah,
material stuff trans people deal with.
yeah, it's 100%. Of course, they deal with tons of material stuff, and I don't think I don't think what I'm talking about would solve things like trans panic or like violence against the trans community at all. And also, I just want to say my problem it's actually not very much with the idea of identifying as female. Isn't what my problem is. My problem is more with just kind of like the strict focus on enforcing language so heavily, which is something I have a problem with in society in general. I find it weird how many movements on the quote unquote like on the left right now revolve around language instead of like material. Like in the civil rights movement, like I was saying, it's like please let us in a restaurant, like let us in the airport, let us drink out of this water fountain. Like we can't get into certain parts of town, we can't make any money. Like that's a pretty
But the trans movement
clear.
isn't all about language. And
A
even
lot of it is.
a lot of it is, sure, but that's because we're dealing with an issue of identity, nobody denied that black people are black after all. Like, that wasn't really an issue on the table. Or nobody believed that, like, I guess some people believe this, but like usually the argument wasn't like whether or not black people are human. I guess some
That's a
people would
pretty
disagree
huge
with
argument.
that. But the language we use is indicative of like some really broad like understandings we have concerning people's general identities. And with regards to trans people, pretty much all of their ability to be treated decently as human beings flows downstream of recognizing them as the gender they identify as. So you have to start there, right? But I don't think that trivializes the movement. I don't think that makes it any less imperative.
Well, I mean, yeah, it doesn't. I just find it a little. It's kind of like what ContraPoint said about like the thing of going into a bar in the South and just having kind of people decide of their own fruition to call you trans, as opposed to like going to like a woke book club and having everyone go around and like say what their pronouns are
Yeah, but I'm not advocating for that. If people want
for
to go
them.
around like do their pronoun runabout, then that's fine and dandy. But I thought we were talking about like the trans movement in general, and I'm still not entirely sure if I understand what your concerns are with the way in which this is being handled.
I just think that sometimes certain statements, like, you know, I like saying I'm a woman because blank, and then you say like a stereotype about women in a society where people believe in like biological determinism for gender roles and stuff is but I don't know, maybe not. I really, yeah, that's just general where I was coming from with it.
Well, well, sure, yeah, but is it not? I mean, but you do the same thing because your gender identity is kind of a product of social expectation. You're deferring to other people's understanding of what a man is in order to reify the legitimacy of your own identity. So I think we
Yeah,
all
but
do that. I
I
mean,
mean, what are you? You're suggesting I do the opposite of what I'm saying I want, right? Like you're
well,
suggesting.
well, if your argument was that you like people shouldn't be able to like, or not that they shouldn't, but that it's irresponsible for people to go by like an identity that they don't have a sexual dysphoria kind of association with, like you should probably be NB, shouldn't you? Or you should identify like as non-binary, because in doing so you would like be saying like the message that you would be delivering would be, I have this genitalia, I look like this, but this is irrelevant to my gender, so I identify as non-binary because I don't think gender and body have anything to do with one another. Like, I'm a
Can
gender abolitionist, but I still
can
identify as a.
non-binary people be called male?
I guess
Can they go by male pronouns?
if you're referring to sex, I guess, but like I wouldn't like. I guess if you wanted to use the term like male-bodied, but it'd be up to like their comfort level, I guess. I
Okay,
don't know.
well then I mean, yeah, I'm non-binary. Sure, I'll say I'm non-binary. Like that doesn't make a difference to me. What I'm saying is I'm not going to take action about like what people like the language that people use whenever they refer to me.
Yeah, just
Like
other people care more about that stuff, like trans people, because they've been shit on their whole life for, you know, stuff surrounding these issues. Like, I'm a I'm a gender abolitionist, and I've been one for a while too. But I identify as a man pretty, pretty concretely. If people ask me, like, I'll tell them. I don't care that much. Like, it's not like a huge part of my personal identity, but I recognize that I was born into this society, and my understanding of what men and women are subject to biases that have been ingrained, that have been ingrained in my mind. And I think that it's okay for people to indulge in identities that make them feel good or make them feel comfortable in their skin, as long as, sort of collectively we sort of broadly agree, like, hey, we're all playing this game, but it's a little dumb, right?
yeah, yeah, well, yeah. That's all. That's all. I mean, I think me and you, basically agree on it for the most part. I was just kind of saying. I mean, if someone is male and they identify as male, and then they kind of just passively allow themselves to be called male, I don't think that that's different than like someone is like wearing a certain thing or something and someone calls them male and they're like, no, I'm female. Like what I was trying to say is like, male, non-binary, whatever, whichever one, like if whatever someone calls me, like I don't care. I'm not gonna like fight with them about it, but because I don't really give any credence to gender, so it doesn't bother me. Like I see what you're saying.
Do you think
But
it's bad for people to care?
I don't think it's bad for. I think like the gendered nature of our society has done like a massive amount of damage to people, like including myself and tons of people I know, people in my family. It's kind of been shocking me recently. So I can imagine that someone has been, someone has had such a certain experience with it that they care a lot, and I completely respect that. But I think, I'm talking about more people who don't care as much. And then I'm saying, so then in that statement, you're
But
taking an
who are
active
you
role
to
in
gatekeep that, though?
I think I can kind of make my point a little clearer here because I kind of lost the thread of it now. I think I've so if I'm if I identify as a man and someone comes to me and they say like you're a girl, or they say you're a man and I don't take a role in it and I don't say anything, then I'm not taking a role in enforcing gender. I don't think. Like, what am I supposed to say? No, I'm a woman. Like, I don't care. It's just like a linguistic tool.
Well,
But then if someone,
wait. But why did they call you a man?
I don't know, because my phenotypes, but
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, but if they call you a man because of your phenotypical traits and you agree with them by accepting that identity, you are accepting and broadcasting the biases that led to that assumption to begin with. You know?
so what should I say? What should I say to them? No, I'm not a man. I'm a
Yeah, yeah. Like if you wanted to be consistent here in your belief that you should not, unless you have a very, very strong emotional attachment to your gender identity, like associate with the gender, then you should probably go as non-binary, right?
My belief is people care too much about words. I think it would be hypocritical for me to say, no, use the wrong word. I mean, look, I think what you're saying is...
Wait, do you think trans people care too much about words?
I think they care as much as... I think trans people care as much as the society they've been forced into cares about words. But I'm just saying, if you have a decision about it, like, and you identify as a woman and someone, like, calls you a man... You say you're a woman and you prefer to be called she, and then some people call you a woman, and every once in a while you meet someone who calls you a man. It's like... when you have to actively take that role and say, no, I am a woman, and I don't fucking think the word woman means anything personally. It means nothing to me in a real sense. And if you say, no, I'm a woman, and they ask why, and then any answer you give is going to be a sexist stereotype.
Well, the proper answer would just be because I identify as a woman. Like, I don't think usually, like, trans women come up against, like, bigots, and the bigot is like, you're not a woman, and the trans woman responds, yes, I am, look at my dress and makeup. Usually the trans woman, like, at least with gender constructionist theory, will argue that they are because they identify as it. Or actually, more likely, they just won't argue at all because transphobes aren't usually, like, prone to being argued with. But I don't think, like, do you have an issue with, like, trans women, like, affirming their identity through language?
Well, no, because I think it's done a big part in a way. I mean, it's done a huge part in deconstructing gender, even though I think it also enforces it in some ways. Like, honestly, I probably wouldn't have been able to think about gender in the way that I do if it weren't for the trans movement. But I think at a certain point, like, wasn't it Thought Slime that you were talking to who said that it's dangerous to be a gender abolitionist because people worked so hard to be part of the roles? Was that?
Yeah, but I circumnavigate that because I'm a gender abolitionist because I want people to stop being hurt by gender roles. And I think one of the ways in which people can be hurt by gender roles, if trans people's ability to identify and reify their identity through language is being gatekept by, well, people like you. I think that's also harmful because then we're kind of in the same boat we were before, right? Instead of like this way, like instead of their identity being shit talked by like transphobes, it's being shit talked by like gender abolitionists who are arguing that their belief in their identity is a contributing factor to like oppressive social stereotypes, but it ultimately kind of does the same thing in the end, right?
Right. Yeah, I guess in my ideal sort of, I guess what I'd like to say is that, like, in my ideal sort of world, it would have been interesting to see a movement of people just kind of defying their gender, like people who enjoy like the feminine presentation and the feminine gender role or think it fits with their identity, of them kind of doing that and then just like language be damned. Like I know that I'm basically asking people to have like not had dysphoria at that point, but like that.
Well, you're asking people to be gender abolitionists and to live to those standards in their own lifetimes, which is difficult for a lot of people to do for reasons I'm sure
Well, why? Other than dysphoria, why would that be difficult?
Because people, even without dysphoria, people care about their identities. And we're told that our identities mean something with regards to gender. So we keep believing that. It's the same reason that people care a lot about their nationality or their race or what football team they believe in. You could argue that for some people, a gender identity is a little bit more essential because there can be like a dysphoria component to it. But I think for a lot of people, like even people who don't have that component, we can all understand how important it can be to identify with certain fundamental aspects of our character. But this is all the more important if you're being oppressed along those lines. So I just don't like the idea of like telling a trans woman like, hey, chill out with calling yourself a woman, okay? We've got gender abolitionism to do. It's like I feel like in that instance, I'm doing more harm than good. I'm doing the harm that I was trying to prevent by being a gender abolitionist. You know?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think mainly really what I'm after is just I'm really glad that you are a gender abolitionist and you bring it up because I think you're right. Like the trans movement is doing pretty well. I just want to make sure there's kind of a consistent presence of like the idea of gender abolitionism. I don't want that to get lost in the weeds. Like I don't want to live in a society where like 100 years from now the only thing that's changed is now we have transgender, but there's still like a binary gender model. Like that would be a fucking huge disappointment to me.
Yeah, I
Like
agree. I don't. I feel like the trans movement is generally speaking the one fighting against this. TERFs will often say the opposite, that trans people are reaffirming like gender stereotypes. But in reality, I think it's the opposite. There is no group of people on this planet, at least not in the English-speaking world, more committed to deconstructing gender as a set of social obligations than the trans movement. There are trans people, of course, who will buy into really hard like gender stereotyping as a way of like confirming their identity. But a lot of those people also agree with gender abolitionism. They're just trying to sate their own discomfort in the meantime. I can't tell you how many trans women I've seen on Twitter and in my discourse say like, yeah, fuck gender abolitionism. But hold on, I need this frilly pink dress or I am no longer a woman. And they kind of joke about it because they recognize the hypocrisy, but that's just part of growing up with really shitty social expectations while hoping that in the future you and society at large will be capable of rebuking them.
yeah, yeah, that seems fair. I guess as far going back to the thing I called in about if the idea is not to be giving puberty blockers to people who are not transsexual, to use that term.
Mm-hmm.
If the idea is, then I don't think we really have a disagreement on that.
Oh, I just don't think doctors were ever doing that. Like you, like
Yeah, well,
I don't like I to my knowledge, like it's not generally a medical trend to like, oh like my son has been listening to like Britney and dancing like in the bathroom and like writing like cute girly font in the fog of the mirror or some shit like that. So okay, like let's put them on gender puberty blockers or whatever. I don't think that tends to happen. It's usually like there are usually like pretty strong signs early on.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean,
that lead.
just as long as it's not like the kid never brings up their own physicality or their biological or sexual characteristics, and then they say like, I am not a woman, I'm not a woman, and then in that case, I think that would still be very bad. But if it's about sexual characteristics, then I think that that makes pretty good sense.
Well, no doctor would ever give puberty blockers to a kid who was concretely saying they were confident in their gender identity. I've never heard of that happening.
Oh, okay. But I mean, well, yeah, all I'm saying is as long as it's about their sex and we're just using the term transgender because that's the common parlance or whatever, then yes, I'm okay with it. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it.
What if the kid wasn't demonstrating any of the physiological signs of sexual dysphoria, but the kid was nonetheless very insistent that they would be happier living as a woman, and in speaking with a medical professional, their desire was affirmed to be sincere?
If they said that they'd be happier living as a woman, I feel like at that point, my concern would be that this kid, well, wait. So in this scenario, they're sure that they want to live as a woman.
Well,
Yeah, because at that point
they're
you're
like
applying.
they're 12 years old. They haven't like really gone through puberty yet, or like they're just barely going through puberty so far.
Yeah, see,
And they're
that's dangerous.
very like they clearly like want to dress. They want to like the way they present themselves, the way they identify. They want people to call them like she her, but they don't have any of the physiological signs of gender dysphoria. Like they don't have it, or sexual dysphoria. They don't have like a strong biological discomfort with their physiology. Would you be comfortable in that
Right.
instance?
Oh no, I'd be completely uncomfortable with that because at that point, like we are on like the cutting edge of this gender stuff as a society right now. Like we're all still figuring out what it means. Like when this like puberty, I mean, we're talking like going into middle school, how we're going to be treating like gender, with these kids. So like puberty might be a time whenever they're deciding like what gender is to them. And also, I don't think your gender identity is tied to your sex. And I think if the assumption is that like we can be so sure that they're going to tie their sexual characteristics to their gender that we might as well just delay their puberty just in case.
Yeah, it's
And
just there's
also
not much
delaying
harm.
puberty is just like that's no joke. I know you can reverse it, but like
Well,
going through puberty when you're like 20 is
whoa. Well,
not.
no. Well, nobody goes through puberty till 20. Usually, the puberty blockers will hold you off from 12 until like 14 or 15, usually, and then like people by then like completely know whether or not they want to like take the plunge and actually medically transition. But like it just seems like the potential harm done by delaying puberty for a little bit really isn't that bad compared to the potential harm done of going through the wrong puberty. As long as the medical professionals beforehand seem confident that's what the kid wants, you know?
E- Um. So you're telling me if a medical professional sees the kid and they're like, "Yeah, this kid's gonna blockers." Um.
Like
I
this
don't
kid
know.
seems
That's
to like
hard.
the
That's
idea.
just very.
This kid seems to like being a girl. Like they identify as a girl at 12 or whatever, even though they were born with a penis. They seem really confident in this belief. Maybe we could, put them on puberty blockers for a few years to see if their feelings like harden out a little bit before like hardcore taking
Yeah.
the
Okay.
plunge one way
So
or another.
this practice only makes like this practice should not be part of medical. So, like if yeah, I guess like I can totally see the benefits of that, but like that should not be a practice that like lasts for a long time. That seems like something
What practice?
the practice of putting a kid on like puberty blockers for that reason.
Well, it's usually like 2 or 3 years, I think. Like it's not like a super long time.
Yeah, well, I just don't want to. Yeah, I think it seems like that's kind of a byproduct of living in kind of a messed up society. So
Well, I mean, you can, like, whether or not that is the case, the doctor's only obligation is to the well being of the patient, not to any
uh
sort of broad philosophical goals. So, in that instance, it just doesn't seem like there's much harm in doing so.
yeah, I mean, if that's what the research is saying right now, like I don't necessarily have a problem with it if we're like relatively certain that like a kid in that situation um would have a problem with that. It seems like the whole thing is kind of very almost like cart before the horse because like I'm pretty happy with the way my gender development and my relationship with it turned out. I think, but I can almost imagine myself like having been trans perhaps if I was born in this like current society and maybe like do you think it's possible that like putting someone on puberty blockers and stuff might inadvertently kind of cause them dysphoria or kind of make them think there was discomfort that wasn't there in the first place?
I haven't seen
You
any
know,
medical
honestly.
indication to that. No. If for what it looks like, it seems like the vast majority of people who go on puberty blockers end up later transitioning because they usually doctors don't just flippantly hand out puberty blockers, but there would be no way like we can't look at a person who's transitioned and then say like, haha, you would have been cis if we hadn't done that, you know?
Mhm.
Like there's no way of really like knowing.
Yeah, I think as long if it's only done sometimes, then yeah, and I mean if that's what the research shows,
All right. Okay. Then I think
yeah,
we
I
can.
think we're probably in agreement. I think, I mean, would you be willing to agree that like ultimately, uh, there wouldn't, I mean, there wouldn't be a need for that ultimately, unless someone had sexual dysphoria. Like there would never, like, I can see in this society, based on someone's like, if they're really, really sure they want to live as a woman, like, yeah, well, they're gonna want to, go through they're gonna want to go, they're not gonna want to go through a male puberty in such a gendered society if they want to live as a woman. So might as well do this. They're gonna be much happier. Like
In a
that makes
in
sense
a
to me.
gender
But like,
in a gender abolished
yeah,
society, I am of the opinion that there would be fewer trans people, and that what we know of trans people would largely be a product of medical transition because there are no longer any gender roles to be uncomfortable with. But it's a
right.
while away from
Yeah,
that.
that's all I'm saying is that like I just this shouldn't be like the idea of like transitioning someone to different hormones because of their personality traits because the two things will gel together in our society. Like this should be something. It's kind of a byproduct of having to deal with problems in our society and making people's lives easier based on that. But like ultimately, like in this future we're talking about, there wouldn't be a scenario where ever if a kid came and said like that they felt a certain way about their personality or their gender identity that you would want to do anything to their physiology because there would be no connection, I think.
Maybe long run, but we would be a very long way
Okay.
away from being able to make that
Okay.
like medical prescription. All
Yeah,
right.
because I know people have to do whatever they can to like survive in this society. So I
I
don't.
should probably get back to the game and read donos. Thank you for coming on
Thank
to
you
talk.
a lot for talking with me.
All
I
right.
hope I was able to get my opinion out better this time. But
I've had far worse conversations. All right. I love you, buddy, okay?
all right, appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.